MASH is still one of the most beloved shows in television history, but behind the success, several key cast members chose to walk away, leaving fans shocked and curious. Now grab a chair, because these are the real stories behind their exit.
Son of a gun here's pretty good.
When MASH first premiered, Mclean Stevenson's portrayal of Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake made him one of the most beloved figures in the 4077th. Behind the laughter, though, Stevenson was struggling with something that many actors face when they're part of an ensemble cast: the feeling of being overshadowed. As the show grew more popular, Stevenson began to feel frustrated that the spotlight was gradually shifting away from him and toward Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce. While Alda became the emotional and comedic center of the series, Stevenson's role became increasingly limited to being the well-meaning but bumbling commander. Reports revealed that Stevenson had voiced his concerns to the producer several times. He felt that his character wasn't developing and that the writing was focusing too heavily on other storylines. He loved the show and respected his co-stars, but he wanted more recognition, more creative involvement, and a chance to be the lead in his own series. In later interviews, he said, "I thought I could do better things and wanted to move on," believing MASH had given him enough momentum and popularity to start a solo career. So by the show's third season, he had made the difficult decision to leave MASH. What followed became TV history.
Henry Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors.
The shocking twist, even hidden from most of the cast, proved MASH was more than comedy. It dared to show the real cost of war. Stevenson himself later admitted that while he hadn't expected such a shocking exit, he respected the creative decision. And after leaving MASH, Stevenson starred in his own shows Hello Larry and The Mclean Stevenson Show, as well as making guest appearances across television. Unfortunately, none of these reached the same level of success as MASH. In later interviews, he said, "I found out how hard it is to find lightning in a bottle twice, and that he deeply regretted leaving MASH, calling it the biggest mistake of my career." Still, his portrayal of Henry Blake left a lasting impression, a reminder of how a kind-hearted, slightly confused leader could bring humanity and humor to the chaos of war.
When are you interested in the Bible?
I peeked at the end, Frank. The devil did it.
Shut up!
Wayne Rogers played Captain Trapper John McIntyre, the quick-witted and charming surgeon who worked side by side with Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce. Their chemistry was one of the strongest parts of the show, and audiences loved their dynamic. But behind the scenes, Rogers began to feel more and more frustrated. When MASH began, both Rogers and Alda were intended to share equal spotlight, but as the series developed, scripts increasingly centered around Alda's Hawkeye, while Trapper slowly became more of a supporting character. Rogers, who was used to strong, well-rounded roles, began to feel like his character was being pushed into the background. In a 2002 Archive of American Television interview, Rogers said, "It wasn't about ego, it was about the integrity of the character. Trapper became a sidekick, and that's not what I signed up for." He reportedly raised his concerns with the producers several times, asking for more emotional development of his character. However, as Alan Alda took on more creative influence in shaping the direction of the show, the focus automatically continued to tilt toward Hawkeye's moral and emotional perspective. Rogers, feeling creatively boxed in, decided he didn't want to stay in a role that no longer challenged him and decided to leave after season 3. But that wasn't the end of it. CBS tried to sue him for breach of contract, assuming he had signed the standard studio contract. Rogers, however, never actually signed any paperwork. This gave him the freedom to leave without any strings attached, and CBS quickly dropped the case. His sudden departure came as a surprise to fans because there was no on-screen goodbye. The next season simply opened with Trapper already gone and a new character, BJ Honeycutt, arriving as his replacement. Rogers later said he had no regrets. He respected his time on the show and remained on good terms with many of his co-stars, including Alda. While many fans thought Rogers was angry with Alda, they actually stayed close friends. Alda called Rogers' departure inevitable but painful. After MASH, Wayne went on to have a successful career in the investing business and as a regular financial analyst for Fox Business Network, proving that sometimes leaving at the right time can open doors to something new. Still, he didn't completely abandon acting. He appeared in a number of television shows, such as House Calls. The departures of Mclean Stevenson and Wayne Rogers marked the first major shakeups in MASH history, and they happened almost back to back. Their exits didn't just change the cast, they reshaped the tone and direction of the show itself. That double exit forced MASH to evolve quickly. It marked the end of the show's early freewheeling energy and the beginning of a more thoughtful, character-driven era. The new lineup with Mike Farrell as BJ and Harry Morgan later joining as Colonel Potter brought a steadier tone and more emotional weight to the stories. In hindsight, Stevenson and Rogers' departures were turning points.
Sometimes I can tell what's gonna happen before it happens.
Is that so?
Corporal Radar O'Reilly, played by Gary Burghoff, was the kind-hearted clerk who kept the 4077th running. Loved for his innocence and charm, he was the show's heart, but off-screen, Burghoff struggled with stress, exhaustion, and problems in his personal life. Gary Burghoff had been part of MASH since the very beginning. In fact, he was the only main cast member who also appeared in the original 1970 MASH film. As the series went on, his character grew more beloved, becoming a fan favorite. But the more popular MASH became, the harder the long filming hours and emotional demands became on Burghoff personally. By the show's 7th season, Burghoff was feeling burnt out. He was a perfectionist, deeply committed to delivering his best performance every time, but the constant pressure started to take a toll. He also began to feel that the show was moving in a direction where Radar had less to do. His innocence didn't fit as neatly into the show's increasingly mature tone. Another major reason for his departure was family. Burghoff had a young daughter at the time, and he spoke openly about how the long shooting days kept him away from home. At the same time, he was also going through a divorce with his first wife, Janet Gale. He later said in an interview, "Radar was pure innocence, but I was exhausted and wanted to be home. I was losing touch with who I was as a father. Not being available as a father is something he deeply regretted." By season 7, he made the emotional decision to leave the series to focus on his family life and personal well-being. His farewell was handled with tenderness and respect. The two-part episode, Goodbye Radar, became one of the most emotional moments in MASH history. The final scene, when Radar leaves his teddy bear behind, became one of the show's most symbolic and heartbreaking moments. Although Burghoff's departure was explained gently on screen, reports later surfaced that he had also been dealing with stress and tension off camera. Some cast members described him as sensitive and high-strung, likely due to the pressures he was under. Still, most of his colleagues spoke fondly of him, recognizing that his emotions came from a deep passion for the work. After leaving MASH, Gary Burghoff largely stepped away from the spotlight. He made a few guest appearances, including in the short-lived spin-off Walter, and later pursued painting and wildlife conservation, passions that allowed him to live a quieter, more peaceful life. Timothy Brown played Captain Oliver Harmon Spearchucker Jones, a skilled neurosurgeon and former football player who joined the 4077th in the first season of MASH. His character was confident, capable, and quickly became a valued member of the team, forming strong bonds with Hawkeye, Trapper, and the rest of the camp. Despite his popularity, Brown's character disappeared after only a handful of episodes. Unlike other departures, this wasn't out of his own free will. It was a production decision. The show's creators discovered that there were no documented black surgeons in MASH units during the Korean War, and they decided to remove the character to maintain historical accuracy. Combined with the fact that the first season was still experimenting with its cast and tone, Brown's role was quietly phased out. Even though Spearchucker's time on the series was brief, Timothy Brown made a lasting impression. He was already known from the 1970 MASH film and brought a strong presence and credibility to the character. His portrayal also marked an early step toward diversity in the 1970s television, showing that even short-lived characters could leave a meaningful impact on audiences. Brown went on to continue his acting career as well as work in music and other ventures, but for many fans, Spearchucker remains a symbol of the show's early ambition and charm. Now, we all know that Loretta Swit, who played the strong and fiery Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan, stayed with the 4077th to the very end. But what you may not know yet is that she came very close to leaving the show more than once. In the early seasons, she was frustrated that her character was mostly written as a strict nurse and Frank Burns' love interest. She feared being permanently typecast as Hot Lips if she stayed in that role for too long. Swit wanted more depth and pushed the writers to show Margaret's strength, intelligence, and heart, not just her temper. In a later interview, she said, "I stayed because Margaret kept evolving. She wasn't a joke anymore. She became real." Her character went on to become one of the most respected figures in the 4077th. Still, Loretta was tempted by other opportunities, including the lead role in Cagney and Lacey. She filmed the pilot but couldn't continue because of her MASH contract. In the end, she stayed until the finale, and it paid off. Her persistence helped transform Margaret Houlihan from a one-note character into one of the most iconic women in television history.
Well, I don't want it first thing in the morning. I want it first thing now.
Larry Linville brought Major Frank Burns to life as the perfect comic rival. Proud, insecure, and always at odds with Hawkeye and Trapper. His performance gave MASH much of its early humor and tension. Yet behind the laughter, Linville began to grow restless. Not because he didn't enjoy the work, but because he felt there was nowhere left for the character to go. By the time MASH reached its 5th season, the tone of the series had started to evolve. What began as a slapstick war comedy was slowly turning into a deeper, more emotional show that explored the moral cost of war and the inner lives of its characters. While other roles like Hawkeye, BJ, or Margaret Houlihan began to show new layers and emotional depth, Frank Burns remained the same, mean-spirited, insecure, and the butt of every joke. Linville recognized that his character had become one-dimensional. Frank was funny, but predictable. Every episode seemed to end the same way, with Frank scheming, getting caught, and being humiliated. Larry Linville was a classically trained actor who wanted to grow and challenge himself, but the scripts didn't allow him to do that anymore. Eventually, he decided it was time to move on. He later explained in an archive of American television interview, "Frank had no room to grow. Every week he was humiliated and defeated. It was time to move on." When Linville left the show after season 5, the writers agreed with him that Frank Burns' character had reached a dead end, especially since Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan had grown beyond being his romantic partner. Instead of killing him off, they chose to send Burns home on a mental health discharge, a fitting exit for a man who could never handle the pressures of life at the 4077th. His departure made room for a new kind of character, Major Charles Emerson Winchester III, played by David Ogden Stiers. Unlike Frank, Winchester was arrogant but intelligent and capable, offering a more complex foil to Hawkeye and the others. Linville later said in interviews that he had no regrets about leaving MASH. He was proud of the work he had done, but admitted that after 5 years, Frank Burns had simply run his course. After leaving the show, he continued to act in television and film, taking on guest roles that showed more of his range than Frank ever could. If you grew up watching MASH, tell us which character's exit hit you the hardest. Also, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.